There's been a few questions on counters versus collectors recently, on what the differences are between them and what they do. So in this video, I'm going to show examples of both of them and explain the differences between them. But basically, they're both around actions and events, and specifically triggering a certain event when X number of other actions have happened. So I've got a couple of simple examples here to illustrate how they work. So I've got a book page here that's got a simple flowchart on it with 3 steps. And if I go and preview that, what I've got here at the bottom, there's a text that says hover over each step to see an explanation. So what happens is I hover over and it shows some information, and it does that for each of those 3 steps. Now what I want to happen is once the user has shown all 3 of those steps, this next button that is currently hidden, I want that to be shown so that they can go to the next page. So basically this is a simple mechanism of forcing the user to look at 3 things or perform 3 actions before the next button is available and they can go on to the next page. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at how to do that using a counter. So what I want to happen is each time I display one of these drop downs, I want to increase the counter by 1. And when the counter gets to 3, I want to display this next button. So the next button's initially hidden. Now, the way that I've got these set up, don't worry too much about it, but basically when the user hovers over this, it is going to drop down this box of information here. So that action of hovering over this is the trigger. So if I go down here to the actions, I can see here on the mouse roll over, I move the explanation down, and then on the mouse roll out, I move it up again. So I can use this to increase my count so I know when to move on to the next page. So I'm going to insert a counter action here. And what that gives me, there's a name in here. I'll just leave it saying counter 1, or I'll just change it to counter. That's nothing too important here. And then I've got up to 8 pairs of count and on counts. And the count is when the count reaches X, I want to do something or other. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say when the count reaches 3, I want to make that next button visible. Okay, so I just want to show that. Now that's what's going to happen for this counter when I've counted up to 3. So I'm going to have to count up each time I hover over one of these. I've already got some on hover or on mouse roll over actions defined for it. So I'm just going to add a new one in here, and I'm going to say counter count up on this one and this one and this one. So I'll select this next one. Same thing, counter, count up. This last one, counter, count up. Okay, so to make it simpler so we can see what's going on here, I've got 3 numbers here that are all hidden initially, and I'm going to display each one of those as we go over here. So I'm going to add these to the counter so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to have another couple in here. I'm going to say on a count of 1, I want to display that number 1. I want to just display count 1. On a count of 2, I want to display that count 2. And on count 3, I want to display that count 3. And it doesn't matter what order these go in. You can see here I've got on a count 3, then 2, and then 1. Doesn't really matter what order they're in. So let's look at that. The main thing here is the next button is going to be shown on a count of 3. The other stuff's just to make it easier to see what's going on. So let me preview that now. So I hover over the first one. You see the 1 is lit up in the top left, and the next button is not visible in the bottom right. Hover over the next one. 2 is now visible, still no next button. Hover over the third one. 3 is now visible, and I've got my next button here. So that works perfectly. And that's basically a counter and how a counter works. Okay, you have something that triggers these counters, which is in this case hovering over these, and then an action based on when that counter reaches a certain value, which in this case is displaying the next button. And just so we can see what's going on, I've got these things in here. But there is a problem with this, in that if I preview this again, what I can do here is I can hover over this one, and I've got my count of 1. I can hover over this one, got my count of 2. And now I can hover over this one again, and I've got my count of 3 and my next button's displayed. Because all that's happening is each time I hover over one of these, it's increasing the counter. And that's it. So I've never actually hovered over this last step. I've never seen that information, but the page thinks that I've looked at 3 things and it's let me go on to the next page. And this is a classic reason why we would want to use a collector, because a collector forces you to look at individual things. So let's look at how we're going to do that. First of all, I'm going to remove all of the stuff to do with the counter. Okay, so let me quickly go and do that. Okay, so now I'm basically back to where we started. Now I'm going to add a collector control. Okay, now this works in a similar way, but how things are triggered are very different. Ultimately, what I want to do is I want to say a very, very similar thing. And I want to say, and I'll do it the other way around here, on a count of 1, I want to display count 1. On a count of 2, I want to display count 2. These are the numbers down the side. And on a count of 3, which is the all-important one, I want to show count 3, and I want to show my next button. Now, so far so good, so far the same as a counter, but it's the trigger that's important. So on this first one, record the simulation, I'm going to, and this is called collector, okay? So on this first one here, as before, we've got the on mouse rollover, and here I'm going to say for this collector, the action, I'm going to trigger a particular flag. Now, what's important here is that each flag can basically only be triggered once. Okay, well, you can trigger it multiple times, but it's not going to increase the count. So what I can do here is I'm going to say flag 1. Okay, on this next one, I'm going to say for the collector, I'm going to flag 2. And for this third one, I'm going to flag 3. So collector flag 3. What this means is that I've got to flag 3 separate flags for this count to get up to 3. Now I happen to flag 1, 2, and 3. I could have flagged 1, 3, and 7 or any. It doesn't really matter which ones I flag, as long as I flag 3 different flags. And that's what this count is. How many different flags have I triggered? So now let's go and see what that looks like. So I go into here, go over the first one. The 1 is displayed. I've got no button down the side. Go to the second one. 2's displayed. Still no button. Go back to the first one. Nothing changes because 1 has already been flagged. So at my on count of 1, I'm going to show this number. That's already been flagged. So going over that again is not going to make a difference. Going over this one again is not going to make a difference. It's only when I've flagged 3 unique flags that this button is now displayed. So this, and that's basically a collector. And the useful thing here is it forces a number of discrete a number of discrete actions to be triggered. Okay. So here it's got to trigger all 3 of these before we can get on to the next page. So that's basically the collector. Okay, nice simple example. I've got one more example that I'm going to show you, which is here. Now, this is a slightly more complicated case, just to kind of further illustrate what you can use a collector for. I'm going to do something very, very similar, but here my instructions say hover over the 3 steps specific to your development process. So here it may be that we record a simulation, then it's edited, then it's published, if it was recorded by the SME. If it's recorded by the author, we record, we review it, and then we publish it. So I want the user to display 3 of these, either this one, and that one, or this one, the other one, and that one. And if once they've selected 3, then it's going to go on to the next page. So we'll do a very similar thing. I'm going to add my collector in here, and I'm going to add the same things before, exactly like we just saw. I'm going to say on 1, I want to show count 1. On 2, I want to show count 2, and on 3, I want to show count 3, and I want to display the next button. Okay, now again, it's the trigger that's the important thing. So here, again, I'm going to say on mouse roll over, I want my collector, and I'm going to flag 1. This one, as before, collector, flag 2. But the important thing here is this other one down here, I'm going to say collector also flag 2. If it's already been flagged, it's not going to make a difference. And then this one here is going to be my flag 3. Collector flag 3. So now what's going to happen is if I go and preview, I can look at this one and it's triggered 1. This one triggers 2, and this one, it triggers 3, and I've got my next button. If I go the other route, 1, 2, 3, and I've got my next button. But if I try and cheat and do 1, 2, again, it won't do anything here because I'm only supposed to be selecting one or other of these. And then only when I go to 3 will it trigger that one. So again, it's useful for where you need to trigger something based on discrete actions and only a specific number of those actions. And that's basically it. The counter, however many times you click on something, it will count up. And the collector, a number of discrete things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all of them, as we saw in this particular example there. Okay, so far so good. All nice and clear, I hope. One last thing that I'll throw in here to show you is an alternative use of a counter. And I'll just give you a quick example of this. So this one here, we have got the user mousing over this and then it drops the information down. Maybe I want to do it so when they click on it, it drops it down, and when they click on it again, it hides it. And we can actually use a counter to trigger that. So let's look at what we've got in there at the moment. We've got on mouse roll over. We're going to move the explanation down so we can see it, and then on mouse roll out, we hide it again. So I'm going to take those two things off here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a counter in here. I'm going to call this one counter for step 1. What I'm going to do here is when the user clicks on this, so on click, then I want them to basically count up. Okay, that's all I want to do. And we'll handle the multiple clicks separately. So on here, I can say when they click on it once, I want to basically take the explanation. No, I want to move explanation 1 down. And when the count hits 2, and this is the clever part, I want to move explanation 1 back, but I also want to reset that counter. So that will basically act like a toggle. So when they click it the first time, it will show it. When they click it a second time, so the count hits 2, it's going to hide it, but then it's going to reset that counter so they can click on it again. I'm just going to do it for this one, but we'll see how that works. So now I go to preview. The hover over doesn't work anymore, apart from that, which I've obviously not fixed. But I click on it, and it drops down. And then I click on it again, and it hides it. Can click on it, drop down, click on it, and hide it. And I've just got one counter that counts to 1, to 2. As soon as it hits 2, it goes back to 0. 1, 2, back to 0. So this is an alternative way of using a counter just as a Boolean trigger on something as well. Okay, so that's just a bonus extra way that you can use a counter in this situation. So everything that you needed to know about counters and collectors and the differences between them. Hope that helps you out. Go play with it, have fun. Thanks for watching.